Border clashes between India and China took a fatal turn. At least 20 Indian soldiers killed in a violent face-off. The Chinese side also suffering casualties. The situation in Beijing getting more severe. Virus cases now exceed 100 with thousands being tested. 30 neighborhoods now on lockdown. 70% of U.S. universities working with Confucius Institutes fail to disclose financial links to Beijing. The Department of Education requires all universities disclose gifts that exceed $250,000. Investigations by the National Institutes of Health result in the firing of over 50 scientists. The report found out of the nearly 200 scientists investigated, over 90% had received undisclosed funding from China. And the Chinese regime facing international backlash as it bears down on Hong Kong. It may be trying the same strategy as in 1989, but will it work again? Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. CCP virus cases in Beijing now exceed 100. 9 of the city's 18 districts are affected so far. According to local officials, 11 markets are now closed. About 300 more have increased sanitation measures. About 30 neighborhoods have also been put under lockdown. According to Chinese media, over 70,000 people have been tested for the CCP virus. About 60 of them tested positive. As for schools, all students from kindergarten to the college level have returned home to continue their lessons online. Many shops have also closed again. Those still open get few customers and are having a hard time making ends meet.
I'm affected, hugely impacted. There are no customers now. Not even one comes into my shop. I have been losing money by paying rent since the Spring Festival in January. I can't even make enough money for food.
Market notices also declare that all the meats and seafood is currently suspended. High-risk groups in Beijing, including those who have been in close contact with a confirmed virus patient, are forbidden from leaving the city. All outbound taxi and car-hailing services in Beijing have been suspended. Many provinces have also imposed quarantine requirements on people coming from Beijing. Most long-distance bus routes between Beijing and nearby provinces have been suspended, but highways out of the capital city remain open. The World Health Organization called the Beijing outbreak a significant event and asked China to share the virus's genome sequence. Beijing has a population of over 20 million, twice that of Wuhan. On the front page of the Communist Party's official media outlet Study Times, an article was published on Monday praising so-called Xi Jinping thought as 21st century Marxism. It was published on Chinese leader Xi Jinping's 67th birthday. Previously, the regime had been reinforcing Xi Jinping thought via schools and education. Hong Kong-based China Affairs commentator Johnny Y.S. Lau discussed the measures with Hong Kong's Apple Daily newspaper. Lau said the education tactics and the comparison between Xi and Karl Marx, the founder of communism, are part of a series of initiatives to deify Xi. According to a report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, China and North Korea are increasing nuclear weapons research. The report explains that the Chinese Communist Party is undertaking a massive modernization of its nuclear weapons, adding that North Korea continues to prioritize its military nuclear program as a central element of a national security strategy. The U.S. and Russia introduced their nuclear weapons back in 2019. Together, they possess more than 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. The weeks-long clashes at the India-China border turned fatal on Monday when over 20 Indian soldiers were killed. The Chinese side also suffered casualties and concerns of escalation linger.
At least 20 Indian soldiers have died from a violent face-off with Chinese troops on Monday night. The two sides clashes with iron rods and stones at their disputed border in the western Himalayas. Indian military officials say 3 soldiers were killed during the clashes, while 17 more were critically injured and due to the sub-zero temperatures in the high-altitude terrain, died of the injuries on Tuesday. Chinese state media Global Times editor-in-chief tweeted that the Chinese side also suffered casualties, but authorities did not disclose the exact number. Indian media reported that China suffered 43 casualties, including death and serious injuries. This is the first time in decades since clashes at the two countries' border has led to casualties. Although Border Patrol soldiers often engage in fistfights and stone throwing, the two nuclear-armed neighbors had agreed not to open fire, so fatal clashes had been rare. On Tuesday, Indian authorities accused the Chinese soldiers of operating in an area under Indian control and say the clash is a result of an attempt by the Chinese side to unilaterally change the status quo there, while a Chinese commander and military spokesman blamed India, saying it proactively attacked an area under China's control. He asked India not to stir up trouble and move in the same direction as China. An Indian expert is concerned the clashes could escalate.
This time what I see is a more aggressive posture by the Chinese, which looks like a deliberate policy to create confusion between India, or rather deteriorate the relationship between India and China at the highest level. That is the feeling I get.
Small clashes have been happening since May. Indian and Chinese army generals have been in talks aiming to de-escalate. Border disputes between the two have continued since 1962, when China attacked India at the desolate and hardly inhabited border covered in rock and ice. Experts say then Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong started the war to counter an internal power struggle within the party and re-establish his authority. While the situation differs for today's Xi Jinping, who is already in total control of the Chinese army. The latest major clash was in 2017, when both India and China ramped up military deployments at the border for 2 months. Both countries are currently suffering from the virus pandemic. Beijing is now bracing for a potential second wave with an already struggling national economy. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
A new report is out on an ongoing inquiry by the National Institute of Health, or NIH. It's looking into the undisclosed foreign ties of professors and scientists who receive grants from other countries. Currently, more than 50 scientists have resigned or been fired. Out of the nearly 200 scientists investigated, 93% of them had received undisclosed funding from China. As a result, nearly 80 have been removed from the agency system. NIH Deputy Director Michael Lauer revealed the numbers on Friday. According to Lauer, out of the almost 190 scientists investigated, nearly one-third were already on the FBI's radar. 70% of them failed to report foreign grants, and over half failed to disclose talents awards. At the time of the investigation, over 140 scientists in 27 states held active grants, worth around $160 million. The NIH's effort dates back to 2018. That's when the organization warned universities across the nation that some foreign entities systematically target NIH researchers in order to obtain confidential research. And it's not just researchers who have been getting undisclosed funding from the Chinese regime. Universities are also targets. More than 100 universities in the U.S. have worked with Confucius Institutes, either in the past or currently, which are tied to the regime. The Department of Education requires that all universities disclose foreign gifts that exceed $250,000. But according to online news outlet The Washington Free Beacon, federal records show only 30% of institutions have disclosed their financial links to Beijing. Concerns are rising about the millions the Chinese regime is pouring into American universities. According to a Senate report, Confucius Institute funding comes with strings that can compromise academic freedom. The report adds, since the Chinese regime chooses all teachers, events, and speakers for the Confucius Institutes, there is no leeway for debate surrounding controversial topics, like Taiwan's independence or the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Experts are worried that the funding could stifle free speech, damaging the academic integrity of American institutions. The Department of Education has since cracked down on universities and is more strongly enforcing the disclosure requirement. It seems to be working. Universities have disclosed $6.5 billion of previously unreported funding. It also shows the majority of the funding came from the Chinese regime and the Middle East. But the Education Department told House Republicans that some colleges are hindering the investigations and refusing to disclose foreign funding. Despite the resistance, the influence of Confucius Institutes in the U.S. has been on the decline. There are currently just over 80 programs in operation. That's down from over 100 in 2017. U.S. lawmakers are wary of a Chinese company pushing for U.S. airport contracts. The company CIMC Tienda was found to be guilty of stealing info from the U.S. once before. In 1998, it stole intellectual property from U.S. company Jetway Systems. Since then, it's been largely absent, but now the company is back to bidding on airport projects in the States. According to Politico, Tienda has found a small U.S.-based company as a proxy bidder. Members of Congress are pushing a bipartisan bill to protect U.S. airports from foreign intellectual property theft. This comes after a letter to the FAA to restrict bidding from such foreign entities, citing security concerns. The FAA has since said it is taking steps to identify such entities that have stolen trade secrets or intellectual property. Congressman Guy Reschenthaler has introduced a new bill to stop Chinese Communist Party members from receiving green cards. It's called the End Chinese Communist Citizenship Act. Reschenthaler says the Chinese regime engages in aggressive and reckless behavior on the global stage, adding that members of the party do not share American ideals and values. 3 out of the U.S. Navy's 7 active aircraft carriers are patrolling the Pacific Ocean. It represents the biggest deployment since 2017. Some of the carriers returned to the sea in May after virus infections broke out on board in March. It's the first time that 3 U.S. vessels have patrolled the area in years, and China isn't happy about it. The tensions are running high between China and its smaller neighbors at the South China Sea, as well as Taiwan. As a supporter of these smaller countries, the U.S. also has a tense relationship with China in this area. China accuses the U.S. of using policies it deems dominating and says the patrols could be a threat to Chinese troops in the South China Sea. Britain's ambassador to the UN, Julian Braithwaite, said at United Nations Rights Forum that China's new national security law would undermine the autonomy and freedoms of Hong Kong. He urged China to ensure Hong Kong maintains its high degree of autonomy, rights, and freedom. Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab voiced criticism of UK-based bank HSBC. This comes because the bank backed China's national security law for Hong Kong, contradicting the British government's opposition to the new law. He said that Britain will not sacrifice Hong Kong people for banker bonuses. HSBC also faced criticism from several other senior British and U.S. politicians over its backing for Beijing's controversial law. Raab added that with this new law, Beijing is now in direct conflict of the Sino-UK Declaration. Britain returned Hong Kong to Chinese rule in 1997. Before this, China signed a Sino-UK Declaration, which guaranteed the city's rights and freedoms until 2047, such as to independent judiciary and the right to protest. North Korea's claim the Hong Kong issue regarded only China and was China's domestic affairs. A Russian Arctic scientist has been charged with treason for passing state secrets to China. 78-year-old Valery Mitko now faces up to 20 years in prison. Mitko had allegedly agreed to collect information of military nature for the Chinese Secret Services. According to one source, this information contained submarine detection technology. China is bowing out after losing a landmark trading dispute against the EU. Now the European Union is imposing tariffs to counter China's dumping of products in the European market, a tactic used to outprice competitors and gain market share by selling at well below the home market's usual prices.
China's hopes of being recognized as a market economy went out on a whimper today. A World Trade Organization ruling said that the European Union did not have to treat China like a market economy. China had until Monday to challenge the ruling, but chose not to.
PRC knew that they would lose the case against the EU.
The EU puts tariffs on Chinese goods because the Chinese Communist Party supports private companies in ways that Western countries do not. It'll often subsidize Chinese exporters so that cheap Chinese goods can flood the international market and undercut foreign businesses. This creates an unlevel playing field for international trade.
Because they have governmental support when they're competing with companies that are privately or that have to source their capital and in the private sector.
So to level the playing field, the EU and the United States placed tariffs on Chinese imports. They based the tariffs on what the price would be if China actually was a market economy.
So Chinese goods then get tariffed or get higher tariffs, offsetting tariffs. And that displeases the Chinese Communist Party.
To be recognized as a market economy, the CCP should allow prices to be set by the market, allow Western companies like Facebook access to the Chinese market, and allow its citizens a say in the country's political process. The CCP doesn't allow any of these things.
The Chinese regime is facing international backlash as it bears down on Hong Kong. The last time this happened, after the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, Beijing had a solution. It may be trying the same tactic again, but the question remains whether this time it will work.
Beijing plans to build a new free trade hub in the southern island province of Hainan. The move comes amid the crisis in Hong Kong. If Beijing imposes its national security law on the region, it effectively marks the end of freedom in Hong Kong, which is expected to end its role as a global business hub. In 1989, Beijing faced a similar crisis. After the Tiananmen Square massacre, the West imposed economic sanctions on China. In response, the CCP made a gesture of relaxing the economy, establishing Shenzhen City as Communist China's first free trade zone. Once a fishing village 16 miles north of Hong Kong, today Shenzhen is a major manufacturing center, a cosmopolitan hub of 12 million people. It seems Beijing is making the same moves this time.
Why would Xi Jinping launch the Hainan Free Trade Port plan at this time? I think it's very clear that he wants to copy Shenzhen.
Tang thinks the move won't be very successful for two key reasons. First, the West has learned that when Beijing loosens control economically, it doesn't alter its political motives.
Its truest purpose is to strengthen the socialist organism with the nourishment of capitalism by means of attracting foreign investment.
For decades, the theory in the West was that open trade with China would eventually lead it down a path of democratization. That never happened.
As long as the system is still in place and mainland China is still ruled by the CCP, it is simply impossible for it to change anything politically.
The second reason Tang thinks the strategy will fail is that this time the West feels threatened by the CCP more directly. Hong Kong, as a former British colony, is seen as part of the family of Western economies. Many Western nationals and businesses call it home. Beijing's national security law means the CCP has broken its promise of one country, two systems.
It made the entire Western world feel that the CCP was absolutely untrustworthy. The whole Western world feels that the CCP is a huge threat.
Today, many democratic countries are actively divesting from China. They're moving supply chains, rejecting Chinese 5G suppliers, and taking steps to fight against intellectual property theft.
You were supposed to align yourself with the free world and gain benefits from it, but the leaders of the free world are now your adversaries.
Tang says under these circumstances, it's impossible for the CCP to succeed with a new opening up policy without any real fundamental change in China.
Now, as Beijing moves to impose a repressive new law in Hong Kong, there's increasing pressure on governments to act. The law could be approved as soon as this month. Our UK correspondent Jane Wirrell has more.
Words from the UK Foreign Secretary this week urging China again to take a step back from imposing a new law in Hong Kong.
This isn't a foregone conclusion. China can step back from the brink, and we urge them to do so.
The looming legislation would criminalise what Beijing considers as succession, subversion and foreign interference. Many fear it will bring communist censorship to Hong Kong, and there's pressure for countries around the world to act. This month, senior lawmakers formed a new cross-party international alliance to push for a tougher stance on the Chinese communist regime. It was launched by British politician and former Conservative leader Ian Duncan Smith. It grew from 18 legislators in 8 countries to more than 113 countries in less than a week.
So the point is that we are legislators, first and foremost, in democracies that believe in the concept of human rights and the rule of law. And we have come together, and there are more countries joining us all the time. So there's a lot of take-up of this. And the reason is because everybody now feels somewhat threatened by the nature of this Chinese government and their imposition, both in commercial terms and also, of course, in strategic terms. So they're coming together to try and say to governments, it's actually for you to come together in the free world. No one country can deal with this alone.
Worries over Hong Kongers' freedoms are shared by lawmakers across the political sphere.
You know, the light will shine a bit more on Hong Kong. And within the Labour Party, more people are taking an interest in this.
Some politicians say they can relate to what Hong Kongers are facing on a personal level, like this Polish-born member of parliament.
So I know what communism is, what it feels like. And I think we have all too often sought to set aside the brutal human rights abuses of this regime.
The British Prime Minister has offered a path to citizenship to about 2.9 million Hong Kongers, and former foreign secretaries have called for a contact group focused on Hong Kong, similar to the one created in the early 1990s for the former Yugoslavia.
Hong Kong is not just an important international financial centre, and it's not just a place that Britain has particular responsibilities to. I think it really is the front line in the struggle between freedom and authoritarianism and tyranny. So it's in everybody's interest, I think, to stand up to the regime in Beijing and do whatever we can to try to prevent them going down this path.
He says it's now up to the free world to decide which side it stands on. Jane Worrell, NTG News, London.
Idaho will begin paying people to go back to work. It's to encourage workers to return before the enhanced unemployment benefits program expires at the end of July. Larry Kudlow says the program is putting some people off returning to work because they can earn just as much by staying unemployed.
Idaho will give residents a one-time $1,500 bonus for going back to their full-time jobs. Only those who became unemployed during the pandemic and go back to work before July 1st are eligible. It's to encourage people to come off enhanced unemployment benefits sooner. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow likes the idea. He believes the pandemic's enhanced unemployment benefits are discouraging people from going back to work. Under the CARES Act, anyone who becomes unemployed during the pandemic is entitled to unemployment benefits plus an extra $600 per week. So some people are earning more by staying at home. The program will expire July 31st. Democrats want to extend it to support people until the end of the year, but GOP lawmakers favor return-to-work programs. Idaho's program will use $100 million from the $1.25 billion it received in federal coronavirus relief funds.
House Republicans write a letter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi urging her to make official plans so the House can reopen safely. They hint that the House is falling behind as the rest of the country eases lockdown measures.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has no plans to bring members of the House back until 2021. House Republicans wrote her a letter asking how the chamber will keep pace with the reopening of America. The letter pointed out the lack of a reopening strategy and no plans to make Congress buildings safe from the CCP virus upon an eventual reopening. Most House members also have Capitol Hill office suites where 15 to 18 staff members work. There are also support staff that prepare food, deliver mail, manage parking facilities, and more. The letter adds that the House members' local district offices have also been slow to reopen due to the lack of official directives from the House. The letter urges Pelosi to come up with a plan. Pelosi has not responded. The Senate returned to work on May 4th, while many House members continued to conduct their duties remotely. House Republicans previously filed a lawsuit to question the proxy voting process. They allege it violates the Constitution's requirement that congressmen be physically present in the chamber to vote.
People attending President Trump's re-election rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma this weekend will get masks and hand sanitizer, according to his campaign. Their temperatures will also be checked before they're allowed in. The Trump campaign says more than 1 million ticket requests have been made for what will be the president's first rally since March. People who attend the rally will reportedly not be required to wear the masks or maintain social distance. But when reserving a ticket online, prospective attendees have to check a box, informing them that they cannot sue the Trump campaign or the venue if they contract the CCP virus. A campaign spokesperson says the campaign takes the health and safety of rally-goers seriously and is taking precautions to make the rally safe. Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.